Lovely. Hello. It's great to be with you guys today. It's lovely as well to see some familiar names and faces. Ali, what you shared was brilliant. So thank you so much. I endeavour to do half as good a job, and Lou will smash it out the park. Yeah, it's really good to be with you. Throughout our session today, as was said, we both work for Youth for Christ, and we are a youth organisation. But we've recognised over the last few years that actually pushing into families ministry and seeing young people come to know Jesus through families and amongst the family is something that's really, really important. And so Lou is our families coordinator, and she's going to be, we're going to be sharing this session between us. And as we go through, what we're wanting to do is talk to you about some of the research we've done briefly, talk about our observations on that. And I guess some of our observations are a little anecdotal as well, in terms of what we are seeing in from youth workers and from young people on a national perspective. And then talk to you a little bit about how we're responding at a national and local level onto some of the findings that we found. So we're going to be pushing in really to four key things that we're noticing at the moment and that we're seeing amongst youth and families. So just as I start, there's a lot of you guys that I don't know. So could you, I'm going to say, put a thumbs up in the chat or give me a wave if your camera's on, if you're someone who would consider yourself like a regular practitioner with youth, children's or families. Yeah, a few little waves, wonderful, a few thumbs, brilliant. Okay. So we would love to hear your thoughts on this and hear whether what we're seeing resounds with what you're seeing as well. So we are going to crack on. Now, I'm going to try and share my screen for my sections. As I say, we're splitting it between myself and Lou. So in my sections, I'm going to be sharing the screen, then I'll hand over to Lou and she'll share her screen. And so we're hoping that this will be seamless to a degree. There's two main bits of research that we're going to be talking from today. Both of these pieces of research will introduce to you, but essentially the demographic of young people is the same in both. When we have done our bits of research at Youth for Christ, the thing that we're passionate about is taking a section of young people generally across the UK. So in anything that we share with you in terms of stats and results, these aren't, like, for want of a better phrase, Christian young people necessarily. These are young people. And we're wanting to find out information about youth culture outside of the church as well as inside. So in all of the research that we've done, it's a section of young people across Britain. It's around 1,000 young people. It's a 50-50 split between those that identify as female and male. 11s to 14s and then 14s to 18s is also a 50-50 split. And so any of this information that we're going to share comes from that background. And so I'm going to try and share my screen, and this is going to be both wonderful and seamless. Here we go. Come on, Laura. Great. So you should now be able to see the first bit of research that I want to spend a few moments talking into. So the first thing that we want to touch on is a digital dilemma when it comes to young people and children and families in our nation. I think often digital engagement is something that we have considered to be a young people's thing, but actually I think as we see children coming up through, particularly the older ones, these are still digital natives. And so the piece of research that we're referencing here, just for our initial statistics, is Gen Z Digital Generation, which is available on our website to view if you wanted to see this a little later. But we're wanting to talk through some of the things that we've seen when it comes to both young people and children as they're growing up. First of all, I wanted to take a look at this statistic. Again, as I said, it's young people generally across Britain, 1,000 young people. So we asked the question during this piece of research, who do you normally interact or communicate with directly online? Now, I'm going to try and zoom in. Yeah, look at that. I don't know if you can see that stat there in the green bar, which says friends at 94%. So who do you normally interact with or communicate online? 94% of the people that they would consider to be friends. So then we said, who you are most likely to interact with. Now, the difference between that question, who do you normally interact with and who you're most likely to, is kind of who do you want to. And so on this one, you can see here, sorry, I'm just going to squeeze again, is that it says 85% are friends. And that's fine, very much to be expected. However, when we go on to our next one, how do you view the majority of relationships you build online? And we have very high specific percentages around friendships. Actually, you can see here that, I know people and consider them my friends, only 52%. I know people, but they're not my friends, 25%. I do not trust the people I know online, 11%. I deeply trust the people is only 11% as well. And so as we begin to unpack what it means for young people to be online and have this digital dilemma, this piece of research is from 2018, and it begins to give you the impression of what we really do, I think, see now, where young people have this kind of ambiguous relationship online of people that they don't necessarily know, they don't necessarily like, they aren't necessarily their friends, but they are people who influence and impact their lives. We've also seen that in recent years, statistics coming out saying that young people are having less sex than they used to be. However, what we have seen is that whilst young people profess to be having less sex physically, sexting and online sex and digital kind of interaction in that way is very much the norm. And so this was a survey that came out fairly recently from Parents Prospect, and it says 38% of young people had sent sexually explicit images to a partner or person they were speaking with. 42% had received sexually explicit images from a partner or person they were speaking with. 48% had sexted a partner or person they were speaking with, and 15% had non-consensually forwarded on sex or explicit content to their friends. Now, the reason that I wanted to bring up those stats and share those with you, I'm just going to get you guys back onto my screen, was that I wanted to talk a little bit about relationship and intimacy when it comes to the digital dilemma. So this isn't just about young people are on devices too much. This is particularly around digital intimacy. And it's a fascinating thing, I think, because even as we begin to consider and think through the platforms that young people are on, so thinking through TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, all of these different things, it's not even that whilst young people spend a lot of their time there, it's not even that young people actually trust the platforms that they're on. I don't know how much you will pay attention to what Instagram and people put out there, but for years, Instagram have been saying that that young people are positively impacted by being a part of their online community, that it has a really positive impact on their lives. And I don't know, I hear that and I think, really? Does it? Okay, I'd love to see where you're getting that from. But in the autumn, it came out that for 2 years, Instagram had been sat on statistics that actually showed the opposite, despite the fact that they were saying really positive things externally. So for example, these are just a couple of the stats. There's a whole report that you can go online and find. But for 2 years, they've been sat on stats like 40% of Instagrammers who reported feeling unattractive and said the feeling of that began on that app. About a quarter of the teenagers who reported not feeling good enough said it started on Instagram. And then a recent survey of social media by UNICEF and Gallup said that 17% of young people said that they couldn't trust, only 17%, of young people said that they could trust social media as a source. And so they're using this method to build these relationships and friendships, and yet they don't trust the method anyway. And so when it comes to trust, when it comes to building relationship, this whole system feels very, very fragile. Prior to the pandemic, we talked a lot about digital addiction for young people. We talked about screen time, mental health. And I don't necessarily think that that's changed, but I do think it feels like post-pandemic, actually adults have joined them in their screen usage and in their social media usage. Even now, today, we're sat on screens for hours talking, and it's good that we are, and we're using it well. But I don't think it's necessarily a split across generations as it used to be. Also, over the pandemic, we've seen a huge increase in gaming. Obviously, gaming was a massive thing anyway, but talking to a lot of youth workers, particularly inner city youth workers, they're finding it really difficult to get young people back to youth groups because they all now just want to spend their time online gaming. They found their communities online. And so as youth workers and as families workers, what does that mean? What does it mean now that digital communication across generations feels so natural, and yet you hear from young people so often that they're desperate to have face-to-face interaction again? And yet digital intimacy feels like it's been established through the lockdowns that we've had in the season that we've been in. And so it feels as if there's a new level of comfort and intimacy, and almost like a new normalization for relationships that are on screens. And so what does it look like for relational intimacy to become increasingly digital? And can it? And this is the thing, I'm not here saying it's a good way of having a relationship. I guess it's a problem that I'm posing. We've got young people in our youth group, and I'm sure if you guys do children's work or youth work, you will have experienced this. My husband also helps out with the youth work in our church, and he sat and had a conversation with a young person and in McDonald's and talked to them about how brilliantly he's seen them grow in the last 2 months, how amazing they are, and just gushed over them and loved them. And then they just sat there and looked at him and didn't say a thing. They were like, thanks. And he was like, oh God, I was expecting a little more back. But then later on that evening, they messaged him and sent him a WhatsApp to say, thank you so much. That meant the world. Sorry, I couldn't express that to you when I was in front of you. And so this digital intimacy, how do we look at this? How do we use it? It's not a new thing, but I do wonder whether the pandemic has put our foot to the floor on it a little. And some people would say that the intimacy is built around shared experience. So what does that mean? For a generation who crave face-to-face interaction, but so much intimacy has been built digitally, and that's where they feel most comfortable. What does that mean for a lonely and isolated generation where intimacy, vulnerability, quality of friendship, and tolerance of those that are different from you was already poor? And there's an argument to say that's only increased. And the thing that I'm trying to work out is that if I'm really honest, I think I see a similar thing in the lives of the youth leaders and children's leaders and families workers that would be the people to speak into this culture as well. And so what are we doing about it very quickly? At Youth for Christ, we're really wanting to push into the realm of digital. One of those things is that we have a YouTube channel called Intro Outro, and we're shifting focus with it a little. We're shifting direction, and we're trying to now on that YouTube channel feature things that both have an online and in-person component to it. So it's not just an influencer or a YouTuber telling people about Jesus for the first time, but there are going to be collectives who also go out and do youth work, who go and meet young people as well. So we're really trying to bring the digital and the face-to-face under one banner. We're looking at starting a gaming team as well to go and do missions with young people, particularly in urban environments, to go and be in schools, be in churches, hold kind of gaming competitions, and go and speak into the RE curriculum and sort of PSHE curriculum around all kinds of things to do with kind of war, online safety. There's loads of different things that we can be speaking into if we're willing to use the curriculum well. There's also a group in Norfolk, Youth for Christ in Norfolk, who are doing some amazing stuff with gaming. I can send you, I'll put in the chat a bit of information about that in a minute whilst Lou's talking, but essentially they set up a whole ministry on Twitch where they play online games together and they do youth work and they share Jesus in that environment, and that essentially now has become an online youth club. Finally, as well, in our church resources, we're really trying to work out what it means to use YouTube as a platform to reach and disciple youth groups as a whole, but also what it means to press into families. And Lou will speak about that a little bit more in a moment. But for a platform that is so accessible, how do we get content about Jesus, discipleship in the home, discipleship in youth groups and small mentoring settings? How do we make that really easy to access and done in small group settings on an interactive platform? I have gone over by a couple of minutes, Lou, forgive me. I'll talk quicker in my next section. But Lou is going to speak now for a little bit about the next thing. However, I will quickly say, sorry, Lou, the way that we've done this is that we've got 4 questions. At the end of each section, we have a question for you. And when you go into the breakout rooms in a little bit, we're going to give you a choice of which of those questions you want to talk about. So I think it will come up in the chat. I was going to share my screen. It'll be quicker. It will come up in a chat in a little bit. The digital question is, do you agree that there is a tension between face-to-face contact and digital intimacy taking place? How might we hold the tension of connection, digital addiction, and the evolution of intimacy in youth work and discipleship? So that question will come up later on, and then you'll have a chance to pick if that's, there it is. Thank you so much. You saved me. It's gone into the chat. Woo! And you'll get to go into small groups later and have a chat about that if that's the topic you pick. Lou, go.
Hello. Right, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully, does that work? Okay, great. Brilliant. So we wanted to kind of have a look at another characteristic that's come out of our research and frame it very similar to how Laura's just shared with you. Laura, you're not on mute, by the way, just so you know.
Brilliant. You can still hear my voice. Wonderful. I'll stop. Yeah.
So this area is the area that I have been employed to look at, and that is the area of family. So my role is at Youth for Christ is what's called the Families Coordinator, and really my role has come out of the research. I am with Youth for Christ because of the research that Youth for Christ and other people have done. And so just to just share a couple of things that our research has found. So one of the pieces of research that we did was January 2020. It was pre-pandemic, and it's called the Z to A of faith and spirituality. And we asked young people, 1,001 young people, lots of questions about faith and spirituality. And as Laura has said, it's the spread of young people. It's not that these are not young people who necessarily identify themselves as Christians. These are young people who don't have a faith, who do have a faith across the spectrum. We asked them loads and loads of questions, and one of the themes that repeatedly came out of this research was the theme of family. So, for example, one of the questions was, if you could ask God to do one thing for you, what would it be? And the top answer, you can see the statistics on your screen. So many young people were saying that they don't know, but when they started to kind of look into what they actually did want, the top answer was to look after my family. Going back to that came above things like, to keep me happy, to make me rich, to stop illness. So that's kind of interesting. We asked young people that said that they prayed, what did they pray for? And the top answer for the young people that answered the questionnaire was family and friends. And then really interestingly for me, and I've been kind of digging into this in my role over the last couple of years, is what is it that influences your thinking about God and spirituality? What is the kind of biggest influence in that? And the top answer was 55% with family. And you can see on the screen the other answers that young people gave. And you can see that church came in at 1% and youth workers came in at 4%. These statistics, they were really clear in showing that a young person's faith and spirituality really has deep kind of connections with family. Family has significant impact, and it cannot be ignored when we are thinking about our youth evangelism strategy. And our findings reflect what a number of other pieces of research and work into this area have presented. Ali shared loads of them. You'll see at the bottom of the screen that I'm just sharing, there's some other statistics, which is from some previous research we did that also showed that family was very, very significant when it came to the impact and influence on a young person's faith. You heard Ali share the Theos report in 2016, where it credited that family is the overriding context where faith is defined and experienced. And also Ali also shared the research from NICER, so the National Institute for Christian Education Research from Canterbury Christ University. So their report, Faith in the Nexus, and one of their sort of conclusions in their findings, so Ali shared that the research looked into this connection between church, home and school. And one of their big conclusions was that in the Christian faith, families are the key institutions. in the spiritual nurture of children. And it goes on to say that if this research tells us that parents generally do not find this task easy. This is a critical issue for the Christian church, when the evidence is that young people are increasingly not responding to institutionalized faith, which is what our piece of research was identifying. Let me just go back. So those that are the greatest influence in terms of a young person's faith, families, we're hearing that they are unsure of how to engage with faith at home. They question whether they are best placed. They're not sure if they are the expert in theology. They're the right people to be sharing faith with their young people. They struggle with lack of time to engage in spiritual conversation. Faith and spirituality is often seen as separate from the everyday goings on of family life. And there's this kind of underlying belief that the responsibility of faith discovery perhaps doesn't lie with the family, but with others. And so as practitioners, how do we bridge this gap between making the most of the expertise of a CYF worker and the most of the influence of family? And that's kind of where my role with Youth for Christ comes in. A youth worker spends perhaps between about 50 and 150 hours a year with a young person. But kind of like in recent times, the majority of focus of mission and ministry has been within those hours, whereas a young person spends around 2,000 to 3,000 hours with those at home. The space of family and home is part of the everyday rhythms of a young person, and therefore, if our mission at Youth for Christ is to see young people's lives changed by Jesus, that's what we commit ourselves to doing. And we are committed to seeing young people's lives changed for the long haul, and their whole lives changed. We at Youth for Christ really want to think about how we minister, not just into the spaces where the CYF worker meets them, but into the everyday rhythms of a young person. And it's also worth noting, when we're kind of thinking about the whole area of family, that church does have a really crucial part to play as family. And we are starting to see, I think, especially kind of since the pandemic, more churches pressing into intergenerational models. But I think there's so much more to be done here. But also there are considerable gaps across the generations, causing harm, I think, to the ministry that we do with young people. And these cracks are being deepened by what's going on around in the world. So the pandemic, economically, politically, environmentally at the moment. And for young people, there are huge questions that they are placing in their lives about the uncertainty of their future, of their education, of their employment, their identity. And, they're even kind of questioning whether the world is even going to exist in however many years to come. And this is kind of causing a real massive and considerable generational separation. There's a mistrust, and so young people are really seeing themselves distanced from the other generations. And so if gathering families together is crucial in a young person's faith discovery, as we're seeing the statistics kind of telling us, then we really need to address this as a matter of urgency. And so at Youth for Christ, we are doing a few different things. And I just kind of wanted to put them under three headings, really: resourcing, partnership, and innovation. So one of the things that we are trying to do is to resource within the space of home, not just within the space of church, within the space of where the CYF worker kind of meets with a young person, but into the space of home, looking at how we set up young people and families for an all-together approach to exploring and sharing faith by creating resources that can equip the church to support this. So during the pandemic, we kind of did a kind of response bit of resourcing. So we created some videos that could be played in the home for a family to kind of engage around and connect with faith conversation and faith kind of action. We also so part of what we do, we create resources for youth workers to use in their settings called termly resources. And in the last sort of few months, we have been looking at how we integrate sort of take home elements. I'm not talking about like homework, but how what is done in the youth group setting can be taken into the space of home. So that's resourcing, partnership. As we create strategy with what we do with young people, we want to encompass working in partnership with family. So moving from sort of just shipping out and holding on to the responsibility of sharing faith with young people, but actually working in partnership with the family, involving them in the ministry. So for example, one of our centres, so Youth for Christ have centres around the country. So we have about 60. They're not necessarily youth centres, but they're bases where youth workers work alongside schools, work alongside churches. One of them in Wales, they really work alongside families by very regularly having what they sort of call parents' evenings. So they meet with the family, they share what's going on in the youth setting, they celebrate their young people, and they involve the family in the work that they're doing with their young people. And then just finally here, just thinking about how important innovation. So innovation is kind of one of our core values at Youth for Christ. And innovation, we really believe, can spark cultural shifts. So innovation is about, pressing into something new, and it's about taking risks. And, as we're kind of thinking about how we engage young people in faith conversation and faith discovery, innovation is particularly important. And one of the things that we've done in the last year is to create, I've got it here, I don't know if you can see that, a Bible alongside the Bible Society. It's called the Family Edition of the Bible, and that's a real kind of innovative product, because there is nothing like it literally in the world. It's a Bible which is all about a whole family gathering round together, exploring together. So I've got a question that I think will get put into the chat, but we'd love you to explore at the end, just kind of picking up on some of these things. I'm going to pass back over to Laura to share our next section.
So the findings, I'm just going to whiz through some findings for you very, very quickly, are findings from a report that we published in 2020. So everything that you read here, the questions were asked just before the pandemic, but a lot of what you find in this piece of research, actually, I think you will find will have been exaggerated even further because of the pandemic. So the findings are really interesting. So when we look at the spiritual awareness of young people, do you believe in any form of supernatural being or power greater than yourself? 51% of young people we asked said yes. The bottom circles are actually from the same question that was asked in 2016, but the 2021 at the top. How often do you think about God and spirituality? In both cases, 35% of young people said that they just don't think about God and spirituality. Again, this is not church young people. This is a random selection of young people across Britain. We asked, if you were invited to find out more about God or spirituality, would you be interested? Now, this excites me because, again, the bottom half of the screen is what came back in 2016, whereas the top half was 2018, which is a higher percentage of young people saying yes, with 36% saying yes in 2020, with only 18% saying yes previously. We then said, do you know anyone who is a Christian or a follower of Jesus? 63% of young people at the top, so in the top circle, said yes, they did, which is 61% was yes in 2016. We asked in 2020, do you know Christians who talk to you about their beliefs in Jesus? 44% of young people said that they did know a Christian who would talk to them, who has talked to them about Jesus and their beliefs. They then asked, did what they shared with you influence your thoughts on God? And 51% of the young people said yes. Now, I don't know that young people who are followers of Jesus realise that 1 in 2 of their friends will sit up and listen in a positive way. And we asked further questions, and this is positive feedback. 51%, so 1 in 2 of their friends will sit up and listen positively when we ask questions about when we talk about who Jesus is. However, this is interesting. So this is a different piece of research, which I can put a link to, that was done during the pandemic, which asked the question of young people across Europe: how often are teens talking about religious and spiritual things? So at the top, you see there again, 46% Muslim, 32% Christian. But at the bottom, the reality is that 44% of Christian teens disagree that they even have a responsibility to share their faith with others, which is interesting when it comes back to the 51% actually saying it makes a difference to them when a Christian teenager does share their faith with them. We asked what might convince you that God exists. A lot of young people didn't know, but if you look here, a lot of the results are evidence-based. A miracle, if I saw him; if bad stuff stopped happening; proof. At the bottom as well, stopping suffering; prayer answered; cure for cancer if he was in front of me. It's not that these young people don't believe in God, but they want to be able to see him, experience him, and know him. We then asked the question, have you ever had a prayer answered? 48% of young people said yes, but this is of those that said they did pray. 48% said yes. He then said, did it change the way you viewed God or prayer? And here you can see that 68% of the young people actually said yes, it did make a difference to them when they'd prayed and seen God do something. It changed the way that they viewed God. That I'm going to come back to that in a moment with our question on for the final time. But as we looked at that, it was fascinating that what young people were after is some sort of tangible experience of who God is and what God can do. And prayer was a really interesting way of engaging in that with young people, but also in the home. Prayer is something that is replicable in youth groups, in family environments. And so what does that mean as we begin to look at sharing Jesus with young people and in our family settings? What does it mean to help young people have a felt experience of who Jesus is through prayer? In Youth for Christ, we've been pushing into what does this mean? Like, how do we create these opportunities? One of the things we're trying to really do in our church resource department is create space in our youth groups to not overpack the programme and actually give space for the young people to encounter Jesus and not just encounter their youth worker. I say that as being someone who is 100% guilty of that myself. I've played a lot of games and had a lot of discussions and talked about Jesus a lot, but not necessarily giving young people the opportunity to meet Jesus themselves. We're also launching a new resource later this year, which is going to be very exciting, which is a resource which is intentionally setting up these experiences and moments for young people to encounter Jesus by giving opportunities for youth workers to ask questions that lead to prayer or biblical engagement in a way that they will find and experience Jesus. Also, Lou again mentioned our centres, and I've popped the link into Norwich Youth for Christ, who did gaming, in the chat. But Shrewsbury Youth for Christ, they're beginning to take young people out into nature on walks and help them to have a spiritual experience there. Crystals are huge with young people at the moment, and they're really pushing into and exploring what it means to have a spiritual encounter. So what does it look like for us to facilitate that as we take young people out into creation? Also, finally, this hasn't opened again since the pandemic, but the local centre here in Halesowen, Faith Trust, they have a prayer room in their youth drop-in, and it's done in a really non-weird way, but young people who come in off the street from the communities go into that space to engage in conversation about God and prayer, and we've seen some really amazing encounters with Jesus in that space. I have stories, I don't have time to share them, but amazing stories of where young people have been healed who don't know Jesus, and then prayed for their friends who don't know Jesus to be healed, and they've been healed as well, and just amazing spiritual engagement in that way. So the question that we want to leave with you, which is going into the chat, I'm just going to leave it, it's in the chat, you can have a look in a bit. I'm going to hand over to Lou, and you can pick which of these you want to chat at the end. Lou.
Brilliant. So just to kind of finally finish with one last kind of characteristic that's come out of our research, which is confidence in the gospel, and Ali talked about confidence in what he shared at the beginning. One of the bits of stats that came out of our Z to A of faith and spirituality research that we've mentioned is that one of the things that helps a young person to discover faith is when others talk about the experience. Now, as well as doing our quantitative pieces of research, we also do qualitative pieces of research, which means that we kind of chat, spend time with youth workers, young people, families, and we ask questions, we do focus groups. And in the summer of 2020, we carried out some of this qualitative research by spending some time with 3 groups of paid youth workers. And through that, what we discovered was that leaders are expressing a huge lack of confidence in sharing Jesus with their young people. And what we identified was a kind of pass it up effect taking place. So the youth workers, they would ask their church-based young people to share Jesus with their friends. The majority didn't, but instead they invited their friends to the youth group, and the youth leaders, they were welcoming, and they carried on as their kind of with their normal activities. But in most cases, they didn't give the friends the opportunity to follow Jesus. That offer that we kind of heard at the beginning, the offer, the invitation to follow Jesus. And instead, they invited them to a summer festival where an opportunity was given from the stage. And we're seeing that there is a massive lack of confidence in leading young people to a decision moment, to giving that offer to follow Jesus. And this is not just amongst CYF workers, this is amongst young people and parents as well. Festivals are a massive part of the way that Youth for Christ have worked, and we're working in terms of our evangelism and our mission. And festivals are absolutely fantastic, amazing. I imagine for many of us, festivals kind of appear in some of our testimonies. That's my experience. I made a decision to become a Christian at a Spring Harvest event that I was taken along to. However, I think our models of strategy on how the festival experience is engaged with perhaps have added to this lack of confidence. A decision moment is often associated with big room events or programmed courses, and there is a distinct lack of associating meeting Jesus through one-to-one conversations, relationships, and the kind of everyday ordinary stuff. And then you pair this with what's going on in the culture around, so kind of cancel culture, and there is a real kind of lack of motivation and kind of responsibility for actually making that offer of following Jesus. The key transmitters are lacking confidence. And so as the church and we as resources, we really want to kind of look at how we can kind of do better in this. And so there's just 3 kind of areas that we're pressing into at Youth for Christ. We're really about seeing supporting and serving the local church. So we want to work alongside churches in the ministry that they already do, rather than us kind of saying we're the experts, we can do this for you. We want to be able to kind of say to churches, you can do it, we can help you, and here are some tools. So we're all about serving. We're also want to be about kind of experimental resources. So we want to provide ways for young people to practice living, acting, and experiencing Jesus for themselves, providing young people with the reflective practices and practical tools to be able to share and shape their faith within the home and also with their friends, so that they can have confident spiritual conversations. And Laura's talked about a resource that we're currently trying to create, which is focused on seeing young people confident and enthused and equipped to share their faith with their friends. That is quite experimental, and we're also looking at creating another resource which is all about creating reflective practices within the home, which is experimental. And these are both, they're not program based, but they are interactive ways to actively respond to the gospel. So kind of removing it away from that big kind of event moment to the realms of the everyday spaces. And just finally, Ali talked about this as well in his conclusions, that children and young people have so much to offer in terms of shaping gospel engagement and discovery. Like young people sharing Jesus with other young people, can have a huge impact. And so at Youth for Christ, we really want to be about empowering young people to have a spiritual voice, empowering young people to shape spiritual engagement. And so that's one of the reasons why we created the family Bible, the family edition of the Bible, and why we've created it in the way we've created it. So one of the things we've done with it is, you know, the pages of the Bible face outwards, so that a whole family can gather around it, but also so that every single person in the household, whatever age they are, has the potential and an opportunity and space to be able to shape engagement with the Bible. So that was kind of a whistle-stop tour. I'm going to pass back to Laura just to close, and she's going to send you off into the groups, I think.
Yeah, amazing. So I kept going on in my flustered way about four questions. There's 4 questions, you can pick one. So in the chat there should be, and there are, because the guys are amazing, 4 questions. 1 around the digital dilemma, 1 around family engagement, 1 around spiritual awareness, spiritual experience, and the final 1 around confidence in the gospel. I imagine you're going to be going back into your groups, and it might be that you want to just take note of 1 or 2 of those questions. We don't expect you to discuss all 4 of those in the time, but it might be that 1 of those may you particularly disagree with something that we said, which is absolutely fine. It might be that 1 of those particularly interested you more than another. So just take note of the questions that you're interested in, and as you go into your groups to discuss, you guys pick whatever interested you most, and you guys have a little chat about that. And I think we're going to go into another break after the discussion groups. I think that's what's happening. So I think we're going into discussion groups. Is that what I'm handing back to? Yeah, great, lovely, enjoy.